Pay close attention, because what is unfolding now is not the kind of change that arrives with a warning. It does not knock politely at the door of your life asking for permission. It arrives with the force of inevitability, removing something that has overstayed its welcome, something that may have been woven into your identity for so long that you no longer recognize it as separate from yourself. By the time most people notice what has disappeared, the process will already be complete. On Monday, June 8th, the last quarter, Moon rises in Pisces at 17 degrees and 38 minutes, and while many will dismiss it as just another phase in the lunar cycle, that interpretation misses the magnitude of what is actually taking place. This is not a passive moment. This is a precise act of spiritual removal. Imagine a surgeon removing what has been hidden beneath the surface for years. That is the role this moon is playing. It is targeting 3 deeply embedded patterns that have quietly shaped your decisions, your emotional reactions, and your sense of possibility. Once those patterns are cut away, there is no returning to the version of yourself that carried them. What leaves now leaves permanently. Yet the most important part of this story is not the moon itself. The deeper truth is found in the sequence surrounding it. The days before and after June 8th form a remarkably coordinated chain of planetary movements, each one arriving exactly when it is needed, each one preparing the ground for the next. There is such precision in this timing that it almost feels as though the universe designed this entire week as a turning point. If you have recently felt an unexplained weight pressing against your heart, if there has been a lingering emotional heaviness that follows you through your days without a clear cause, if part of you senses that something wants to break free, but you cannot identify what it is, then what you are experiencing is not random. There is a specific reason for that sensation, and understanding it will change the way you see everything that has been happening lately. Before we get there, however, you need to understand why this particular lunar event stands apart from every other moon we have experienced this year. The answer begins with the larger story of 2026 itself. This year is not operating according to familiar patterns. It marks the end of an era that has defined collective experience for a very long time. For years, the slow-moving planets occupied Pisces, saturating the atmosphere with themes of surrender, uncertainty, emotional merging, and blurred boundaries. Saturn traveled there. Neptune traveled there. Humanity has spent years navigating waters where certainty dissolved and emotional lines became difficult to distinguish. Many people lost themselves in the needs, pain, and expectations of others. Many struggled to separate intuition from confusion. Many carried emotional burdens that were never truly theirs. But the cosmic landscape has shifted dramatically. Neptune completed its move into Aries in January. Saturn followed into Aries in February. Uranus entered Gemini in April. Jupiter is preparing to enter Leo before this month concludes. These movements are not small adjustments. They represent an entirely new energetic environment. The dominant influences are no longer rooted in water. They are moving through fire and air. The atmosphere has become faster, sharper, and far less tolerant of stagnation. The old Piscean chapter, the chapter of drifting, dissolving, and disappearing into emotional currents, has already closed. The challenge is that while the planets have moved forward, many people are still carrying remnants of that previous cycle. Emotional leftovers remain. Old wounds continue operating beneath awareness. Invisible habits still shape reactions. There are karmic traces lingering in places where growth has already occurred. This is where the last quarter moon becomes so important. It arrives as a final clearing process. It is not introducing something new. It is removing what no longer belongs. Its purpose is to clear away the debris of a chapter that has already ended so you can finally occupy the life that is waiting beyond it. If you have felt suspended between two realities recently, if part of you still feels connected to an old version of yourself, while another part senses a future that has not fully arrived, Then you are standing exactly where this moon expects you to be. The transition has already begun, whether you realize it or not. In fact, the influence of June 8th did not suddenly appear on the calendar. Its effects started days earlier. You have likely been living inside this process without recognizing it. Everything began shifting on June 1st, when Mercury entered Cancer. The mind became more emotional, more reflective, and more connected to memory. Thoughts stopped behaving like abstract concepts and started carrying emotional weight. Memories resurfaced unexpectedly. Conversations from the past replayed themselves. Situations you believed were resolved suddenly returned to your awareness. It felt less like remembering and more like reliving. Then June 3rd arrived, bringing Mercury into a square with Neptune. This is the moment many people began feeling disoriented. Mental clarity became harder to access. Perception grew uncertain. The line separating intuition from fear became increasingly difficult to identify. Doubt entered places where confidence once existed. Questions multiplied. Decisions that previously seemed straightforward suddenly felt tangled and confusing. If you have spent the week wondering whether you can trust your own judgment, this alignment is a major reason why. Then came June 6th, when the moon entered Pisces and intensified everything. Emotional barriers weakened. Feelings that had been buried beneath responsibilities and distractions rose toward the surface. Grief that seemed resolved reappeared. Attachments you believed you had released revealed deeper roots. Old emotional stories resurfaced with surprising intensity. This was not a punishment. It was preparation. Because before anything can be removed, it must first become visible. Before anything can be released, it must rise into awareness. The moon in Pisces opened the floodgates so that everything ready to leave could finally be seen. It gathered the emotional material necessary for the next stage of the process. And that brings us directly to June 8th. The last quarter moon is not interested in preserving what has already expired. Its purpose is transformation through removal. It takes everything that has resurfaced during the previous days and subjects it to a final reckoning. What has outlived its purpose begins to fall away. What belongs to an earlier chapter begins to dissolve. What has been occupying space without supporting growth begins to disappear. And as this process unfolds, you may discover that the real question is not what is leaving your life. The real question is why it stayed so long in the first place. That realization is where the next part of this story begins. What if the most important moment of this lunar cycle is the one almost everyone ignores? Most people pay attention when a new moon arrives because they are told to set intentions. They pay attention when a full moon appears because they are told to release what no longer serves them. Everything in between is often treated as background movement, a bridge between more dramatic events. But that assumption overlooks one of the most psychologically powerful phases in the entire lunar journey. The last quarter moon operates differently. It does not focus on creating something new, nor does it simply ask you to let something go. Instead, it confronts the structure of your consciousness itself. The renowned astrologer Dane Rudyard described this phase as a crisis in consciousness, and that phrase carries far more weight than most people realize. This is not a crisis unfolding in your career, your relationships, or your external circumstances. This is a confrontation taking place inside your perception, inside the way you understand yourself and your place in the world. It is the kind of realization that arrives without warning. One moment you are moving through life exactly as you always have, and the next, something shifts. A belief you have carried for years suddenly reveals its limitations. A role you have identified with begins to feel foreign. A story you have repeated to yourself countless times no longer sounds true when you hear it. The change is not gradual. It can feel startling, even uncomfortable. There is a sharpness to it. You recognize that something you once depended on has quietly expired. You understand that you have been carrying an identity, a narrative, or a habit that stopped serving your growth long ago. This is the essence of the crisis Rudyard described. The universe is not imposing a new reality upon you. It is illuminating a reality that has existed all along. What changes is your ability to see it. Once that veil lifts, everything looks different. The disguise becomes visible. The emotional pattern that once felt normal suddenly reveals itself as a limitation. The coping mechanism that protected you in another season of life now feels restrictive. And the most challenging part is that awareness cannot be reversed. Once you recognize the truth, there is no returning to the comfort of ignorance. This is why the last quarter moon can feel both liberating and unsettling at the same time. It offers freedom, but only after confronting you with what must be left behind. Earlier, I mentioned that many people have been carrying a strange, emotional heaviness recently. Perhaps you have felt pressure building beneath the surface. Perhaps there has been an unexplainable sensation that something inside you wants to emerge. Maybe you have noticed moments where emotions appear out of nowhere, or where your chest feels tight despite having no obvious reason for it. The reason is becoming clear now. The process has already begun. Long before your conscious mind identified the issue, a deeper part of you recognized what was no longer aligned. Your inner awareness already understands what needs to be released. The discomfort comes from the gap between what your soul knows and what your conscious identity is still trying to hold on to. That gap creates tension. That tension creates pressure. And this moon brings that process into full view. The deeper symbolism of June 8th reveals an even more remarkable layer of meaning. Hidden within the zodiac are symbolic images known as Sabian symbols. Each degree carries its own archetypal message, a symbolic picture that offers insight into the deeper purpose of a particular moment. The symbols activated by this last quarter moon create a narrative that feels almost uncannily relevant to what so many people are experiencing right now. The moon in Pisces activates the image of villagers gathered beneath an enormous tent, captivated by an extraordinary performance. Consider what that image represents. People coming together because they are moved by the same experience. Individuals finding connection through shared resonance rather than obligation. A gathering formed around inspiration, meaning, and mutual recognition. There is something deeply human about that image. Now compare it with the symbol activated by the sun in Gemini. Two men speaking their native language while living in a foreign city. Surrounded by unfamiliar voices, surrounded by people who do not fully understand them, they find comfort in a language that reflects who they truly are. There is belonging within apparent isolation. There is recognition amid misunderstanding. Together, these symbols reveal a message that is impossible to ignore. For far too long, you may have been trying to gain acceptance from people who were never equipped to understand your truth. You may have spent years adjusting your message, softening your voice, translating your authentic experience into forms that felt more acceptable to others. You may have reduced parts of yourself in order to receive approval. And perhaps without realizing it, that effort has become exhausting. There is a particular kind of fatigue that comes from constantly reshaping yourself to fit environments that were never designed for your authenticity. The June 8th. Last quarter, Moon challenges that pattern directly. It asks a difficult question. Why are you still performing for an audience that cannot truly hear you? The symbolism suggests that the place where you belong already exists. The people capable of recognizing your truth already exist. The connections aligned with your authentic self already exist. Yet you cannot discover them while continuing to abandon parts of yourself for the sake of acceptance. The larger message becomes clear. Stop shrinking. Stop editing yourself into something smaller. Stop measuring your worth through the comfort level of those who were never meant to walk your path. If these words create an emotional reaction inside you, if something deep within you recognizes this message immediately, then pay attention. Because the patterns being dismantled by this moon are directly connected to the feeling of stagnation many have been carrying. The first pattern facing dissolution is the tendency towards self-sacrifice that has been mistaken for virtue. For some viewers, this realization may be deeply emotional, not because the behavior is dramatic or obvious, but because it often hides beneath everyday choices. It appears when you consistently place everyone else's needs ahead of your own. It appears when you ignore your inner limits in order to avoid disappointing others. It appears when you say yes, despite every instinct urging you toward no. Over time, this pattern drains vitality. It creates exhaustion. It creates resentment. It creates a quiet bitterness that often remains hidden beneath the surface. Pisces, in its shadow expression, can encourage the belief that suffering proves goodness, that self-abandonment demonstrates love, or that personal sacrifice somehow increases spiritual worth. Yet the sun in Gemini is illuminating a different truth. It is cutting through that narrative with remarkable clarity. The realization emerging now may be uncomfortable, but it is necessary. What many people have called love was never actually love at all. It was a survival strategy learned long ago. It was a response developed in environments where meeting other people's needs felt safer than honoring your own. And as this moon continues its work, that realization becomes impossible to ignore. The identity built around endless giving begins to crack. The belief that your value depends on how much you sacrifice begins to lose its power. And that is where the next stage of this transformation is waiting to begin. At some point in your life, perhaps so long ago that you no longer remember where it began, you accepted an idea that quietly shaped everything that followed. You learned to measure your worth through endurance. You learned that being needed felt safer than being authentic. You learned that carrying burdens for other people earned approval, connection, and belonging. Since then, that belief has operated beneath the surface of your life like an invisible script, influencing choices you never questioned and sacrifices you barely noticed. Little by little, you became someone who absorbed pain that was never yours to hold. You convinced yourself it was kindness. You called it compassion. You framed it as generosity. Yet beneath those noble labels was something far more costly. You were abandoning yourself in order to protect everyone else. The last quarter moon, on June 8th, brings this pattern to a critical threshold. The moment arrives when maintaining the pattern becomes more painful than releasing it. This is not likely to appear as a dramatic emotional explosion. In fact, it may feel surprisingly quiet. A profound exhaustion settles in. A deep internal recognition emerges. Something within you simply refuses to continue. It is not fueled by resentment. It is not driven by anger. It is a calm and undeniable boundary arising from the deepest layers of your being. For perhaps the first time, a part of you says no without guilt, no without explanation, no without negotiation. That single word becomes the doorway to an entirely different future, because every meaningful transformation begins when you stop betraying yourself to preserve the comfort of others. As this realization unfolds, another pattern begins to weaken. For many years, perhaps much longer than you would prefer to acknowledge, you may have relied on subtle forms of escape whenever life became too overwhelming. When reality felt sharp, confusing, or emotionally intense, retreat became a survival strategy. Sometimes that retreat appeared through endless distractions. Sometimes it emerged through screens, fantasies, excessive sleep, emotional detachment, or anything else capable of creating distance from what felt difficult to face. This was never a reflection of weakness. It was the response of a nervous system attempting to protect itself from overload. The long Piscean chapter encouraged this tendency. Everything felt emotionally amplified. Boundaries blurred. Feelings became overwhelming. Escaping into another reality often seemed easier than confronting the one directly in front of you. But the energetic landscape of this year has changed. The planets have moved forward. Fire and air now dominate the cosmic atmosphere. These elements demand engagement. They demand participation. They require presence. The era of drifting between possibilities is ending. The era of conscious involvement is beginning. This is why the last quarter moon is removing the final layers of emotional haze. Whether you feel prepared or not, the protective fog is dissolving. The Gemini sun plays a crucial role in this process because Gemini insists on awareness. It insists on interaction with what is actually happening. It asks questions. It seeks facts. It refuses to remain asleep. Under its influence, avoidance becomes increasingly difficult. The things you once ignored begin demanding attention. The truths you postponed begin stepping forward. The parts of your life that existed in uncertainty become impossible to overlook. This can feel intimidating because clarity is rarely comfortable at first. When the fog disappears, everything becomes visible. Relationships you have been excusing suddenly reveal their true condition. Circumstances you have been minimizing become impossible to deny. Decisions that once felt optional transform into necessities. Yet despite how unsettling this may feel, there is profound freedom hidden inside it. After all, no situation can be transformed while it remains hidden from view. No healing can begin while denial remains intact. Every moment spent avoiding reality delayed your ability to engage with the life waiting for you. June 8th removes that delay. The fog lifts. The landscape becomes visible. What you choose to do with that vision becomes the next chapter of your journey. Then we arrive at what may be the most significant shift of all. For those who are exceptionally sensitive, intuitive, and emotionally receptive, this transformation has the potential to redefine the entire year. Pisces possesses a remarkable gift. It can dissolve barriers between people. It can generate empathy so profound that another person's emotions feel like your own. It creates extraordinary compassion and spiritual awareness. Yet every gift carries a shadow. When boundaries disappear completely, empathy becomes overwhelm. Sensitivity becomes exhaustion. Compassion becomes self-neglect. Many people influenced by this energy spend years carrying emotional weight that never belonged to them. They walk into a room and unconsciously absorb the atmosphere. They feel tension that was never theirs. They sense anxiety that originated in someone else's experience. They leave interactions depleted without understanding why. They commit to obligations that drain them because declining feels uncomfortable. Over time, this pattern creates a life where personal energy is constantly leaking outward. The individual becomes so accustomed to absorbing everything that they forget what their own emotional landscape feels like. The last quarter moon marks a decisive turning point in this cycle. Something within the system reaches its limit. A realization emerges. The body recognizes that it cannot continue carrying what does not belong to it. The psyche begins sorting through accumulated emotional debris. Absorbed grief starts separating from authentic feeling. Energies collected from others begin releasing their hold. Invisible emotional attachments that have quietly consumed vitality begin dissolving. This process can feel strange because many people have never experienced a healthy, energetic boundary. They mistake boundaries for isolation. They mistake self-protection for selfishness. Yet what emerges after this release is neither detachment nor separation. It is something far more balanced. Imagine a boundary that allows connection without depletion. Imagine remaining compassionate without becoming consumed. Imagine being able to love deeply while still maintaining a clear sense of where you end and another person begins. This is the energetic structure being formed now. It is not a wall. It is not emotional distance. It is a living boundary that welcomes intimacy while preventing unnecessary loss of energy. For many viewers, recent exhaustion may already be evidence that this process has begun. Perhaps you have felt an unexpected desire for solitude. Perhaps social interaction feels more draining than usual. Perhaps your body has been requesting rest, even when your mind believes you should remain active. These signals are meaningful. They are not signs of weakness. They are signs of preparation. Your system is gathering strength. It is pulling inward to reorganize itself before emerging in a healthier form. Trust that instinct. Trust the desire to pause. Trust the need for space. Something essential is being rebuilt beneath the surface. On the other side of June 8th exists a version of you capable of experiencing emotion without drowning in it, capable of caring without carrying, capable of remaining open without becoming overwhelmed. And as these three patterns begin collapsing simultaneously, it is natural to feel apprehensive. Any identity built over years will resist change when its foundations begin shifting. The thought of releasing behaviors that have quietly shaped your life can feel intimidating because even painful patterns create familiarity. They become part of who you think you are. Yet this is precisely why the next part of the story matters so much. Because despite how dramatic this transformation appears, there is something already waiting to catch you as the old structures begin to fall away. The truth is that releasing long-established defense mechanisms is never a comfortable experience. When the structures that have protected you for years begin to fall apart, even if they were limiting your growth, there is often a moment when you feel exposed. The familiar ways you once navigated life no longer function, yet the new version of yourself has not fully emerged. It can feel vulnerable. It can feel uncertain. It can feel as though layers of protection are being removed faster than you can replace them. But what makes this particular cosmic sequence so extraordinary is that it was never designed to leave you stranded in that vulnerable space. There is a remarkable balance woven into the timing of these events, and once you see it, it becomes difficult not to be amazed by the precision. Only hours after the last quarter moon completes its work on June 8th, another alignment arrives. On June 9th, Venus and Jupiter meet in an exact conjunction at 25 degrees Cancer. This is not a minor influence. Venus governs connection, affection, harmony, and the experience of feeling valued. Jupiter governs growth, protection, opportunity, and abundance. When these two planets unite, they amplify one another. When they unite in Cancer, the most nurturing and emotionally supportive sign of the zodiac, their influence becomes even more profound. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, meaning it expresses its gifts at the highest possible level. Its capacity to protect, expand, and bless reaches exceptional strength. Combined with Venus, the result is a powerful current of emotional generosity, acceptance, and support. It is as though the universe has anticipated every fear that might arise from the dismantling process and prepared a response before the fear could even fully form. The message hidden within this conjunction is deeply reassuring. The structures that are being removed were never meant to leave you empty. They were being removed to create space for something healthier. As the walls built from self-sacrifice begin to collapse, genuine connection can finally reach you. As unhealthy patterns of emotional absorption dissolve, real intimacy becomes possible. For many people, the love they have been seeking could never fully enter their lives because there was no healthy framework capable of receiving it. Without boundaries, love becomes overwhelming. Without self-awareness, care becomes dependency. Without emotional clarity, connection becomes confusion. But now something different is emerging. Boundaries are strengthening. Awareness is expanding. Emotional stability is taking root. Because of that, the support symbolized by Venus and Jupiter can finally land where it is meant to. Relationships that once seemed hopelessly complicated may begin revealing new possibilities. Family situations that have remained tangled for years may start finding resolution. Emotional wounds connected to belonging may begin softening. There is a growing sense that acceptance no longer requires performance. You no longer need to exhaust yourself in order to earn affection. You no longer need to disappear into fantasy to experience happiness. You no longer need to carry everyone else's emotional burdens to prove that you care. The conjunction of Venus and Jupiter delivers a powerful realization. Love was never asking for your suffering. Love was never demanding your exhaustion. Love was never dependent upon self-abandonment. The days surrounding June 9th create an opportunity to experience connection from an entirely different place, one built on mutual respect rather than sacrifice. Yet the sequence does not stop there. Another piece of the puzzle arrives immediately afterward, and its purpose is just as important. On June 10th, Mercury forms a square to Saturn. While the Venus and Jupiter conjunction provides emotional reassurance, Mercury square Saturn provides structure. If June 9th feels like a welcoming embrace, June 10th feels like the construction of something permanent. Mercury in Cancer processes life through memory, emotion, and personal experience. Saturn in Aries operates very differently. Saturn demands accountability. It requires discipline. It insists on maturity and follow-through. When these two forces collide through a square, the result can feel challenging. Thoughts become heavier. Conversations carry greater significance. Decisions require careful consideration. Mental energy slows down and every choice seems to carry additional weight. This is not an accident. It serves a crucial purpose. The patterns that were dismantled during the last quarter moon do not disappear without resistance. Old habits always attempt to return. Familiar behaviors often seek re-entry the moment discomfort appears. The difference now is that Mercury square Saturn creates a framework strong enough to prevent that regression. This alignment teaches you how to express your new reality with authority. Not through defensiveness, not through endless explanations, not through guilt or justification. Instead, it teaches the power of clarity. It teaches the strength of certainty. It teaches the kind of calm conviction that communicates a boundary without needing to argue for it. Saturn's role is to ensure that the emotional breakthroughs of June 8th and June 9th become more than temporary feelings. It transforms insight into structure. It transforms realization into practice. It transforms awareness into a new way of thinking and communicating. The heaviness many people experience under Mercury square Saturn is often misunderstood. It is not evidence that something has gone wrong. It is evidence that something real is being built. Every lasting foundation requires weight. Every structure designed to endure must be reinforced. What feels heavy now may actually be the process of creating stability where instability once existed. By the time this sequence reaches completion, something fundamental has shifted. The person who entered this week carrying responsibilities that never belonged to them is no longer operating from the same place. The person who hid inside uncertainty, confusion, and emotional fog is beginning to disappear. The person who repeatedly ignored their own needs to satisfy the expectations of others is stepping aside. What emerges in place of those patterns is not perfection. It is not some unreachable spiritual ideal. It is something far more valuable. It is a grounded human being capable of remaining present without becoming overwhelmed. It is someone who can experience deep emotion without losing themselves inside it. It is someone who understands the difference between compassion and self-sacrifice. It is someone who has stopped seeking validation from audiences that could never truly understand them. and started moving toward the people and environments where authenticity is welcomed rather than questioned. In many ways, this sequence represents the final major release connected to the long Piscean chapter that has shaped recent years. Beyond this point, the atmosphere changes. The emphasis shifts toward Aries' themes of courage, initiative, independence, and action. That future cannot be fully embraced while carrying the unresolved emotional weight of the past. It cannot be entered while hiding inside confusion. It cannot be claimed while boundaries remain undefined. This is why June 8th matters so deeply. It creates the opening. It removes what no longer belongs with remarkable precision. It clears away what has been obstructing growth. And waiting beyond that release is the new moon in Gemini on June 14th, a fresh beginning and an opportunity to establish entirely new patterns. The ground must be cleared before new seeds can take root. That is exactly what this sequence accomplishes. So allow this process to unfold. Allow emotions to surface if they need to. Allow the heaviness to move through your system rather than resisting it. Allow clarity to arrive even when it reveals truths you were not expecting. Because what is leaving your life now is not something required for your future. It is something that helped you survive a previous chapter. Honor it for the role it played, then release it. Survival is no longer the assignment. A different chapter is beginning. One where your energy can be directed toward living, creating, connecting, and becoming. And if this message found you at exactly the right moment, if these insights resonate with what you have been experiencing, thank you for sharing this journey. Your presence here matters more than you know. If you found value in this content and would like to continue exploring these powerful cosmic movements together, consider subscribing and becoming part of this growing community. Feel free to share your thoughts and experiences below, because your story may be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Until our paths cross again, take care of yourself, trust the process unfolding around you, and stay connected for more insights into the extraordinary transformations shaping this year.